Welcome back! In the previous part, we witnessed how the desert war escalated and how both sides struggled for control. Now, we continue right where we left off. Although Rommel initially doubted the maps, fearing a trap, he was forced to believe them due to his staff's insistence, making his greatest mistake throughout the war. The map was so well made that all roads led the Germans toward the British, and where there were sand dunes, it showed roads, and where there were flat plains, it showed elevations. The Germans only realized this on August 30th, the day they began their attack. As a result, the German panzers suddenly found themselves in front of British tanks and could not reach their objectives. Finally, on September 1st, Rommel accepted defeat and retreated to his initial starting point. British General Montgomery knew that with British air units based in Malta cutting Rommel's supply line, the German-Italian forces could receive very few reinforcements and their fuel stocks were limited. Indeed, Rommel had only 3 days of fuel remaining. Therefore, the British decided to launch an attack to drive the German-Italian forces out of North Africa. In the northern sector of the front, on October 23, 1942, British artillery opened fire before dawn. While infantry units advanced on the Germans from the north and south, Allied air forces heavily bombarded the German headquarters. During this air attack, the German communication lines were seriously damaged, and Rommel's deputy commander, George Stumm, was killed. The first major tank clashes of the Battle of El Alamein occurred on October 24th. This clash, involving over 100 tanks, lasted until nightfall, and both sides lost nearly half of their tanks. On October 25, 1942, Rommel returned to his headquarters in the evening. He assessed the state of the army and saw that the Italians had lost half of their strength. Daily rations had been halved due to supply difficulties, leaving only 3 days of food for the entire army. On October 26th, Rommel launched a snow assault near Tel Asa, using all available air and ground forces. However, the forward units stalled due to fuel shortages and were forced to retreat under exposure to British air forces in open terrain. Meanwhile, an Allied bomber fleet sank a German tanker approaching the port of Tobruk, ending Rommel's last hope for supplies. The offensive that began on November 2nd aimed to destroy enemy armored units. Despite Allied air attacks, German tanks destroyed 102 out of 128 British tanks. This full-day offensive became the last tank battle of the Battle of El Alamein. On November 3rd, Rommel sent a message to Hitler asking for permission to retreat due to the hopeless situation, but it was denied. On the same day, German General von Thoma was captured after all the tanks under his command were destroyed. Knowing that continuing resistance would mean the loss of all forces, Rommel ordered a retreat despite Hitler's command. Although Rommel successfully withdrew his forces to Tunisia, they were not evacuated from the African continent in time. Only Rommel, along with Italian and German generals, was evacuated to Germany to avoid capture. On August 13, 1943, 270,000 German and Italian soldiers surrendered to American and British forces. Thus, the Axis powers' North African campaign came to an end. With this defeat, the Italians also lost the colonies they had previously held. Logistical inadequacy, lack of weapons and ammunition, and disrupted supply lines were the reasons Germany lost the war. Perhaps if Hitler had directed his attention to El Alamein instead of Moscow, Germany could have won the war, reaching oil fields and isolating both Britain and Soviet Russia. Pacific Front, the theater of war from 1937 to 1945, opened by Japan, who wanted to apply the expansionist policies Germany followed in Europe to Asia, covering the Pacific Ocean and its islands, Southeast Asia, and China. The opening of this front is considered the start of the Sino-Japanese War on July 7, 1937. The most important event of the war was Japan's attack on the Pearl Harbor Naval Base on Oahu Island, USA, on December 7, 1941. As a result of the Pearl Harbor attack, the United States entered the war, turning it into a true world war. In 1937, Japan had control over China's Manchuria region. However, the Japanese eyed the coastal areas of China to gain more territory and spread their population across Asia. In September 1937, Japanese naval forces began bombing and occupying the Chinese coasts. Meanwhile, a civil war was taking place in China between the nationalists and the communists. With the start of the Japanese invasion, the nationalists and communists made peace and decided to fight together against the Japanese. The rapidly advancing Japanese army occupied Beijing on September 14th, followed immediately by Beijing. After the capital was occupied, the Chinese government declared Chongqing as the new capital. However, the Japanese had no intention of stopping. By December, the Japanese had taken control of territories deep into the interior of China. The United States, Britain, and the League of Nations were displeased with Japan's attacks on China and warned them to end the invasions. When these countries had reacted similarly to Japan in 1933, Japan had been cautious of the League of Nations. By 1939, the United States suspended the America-Japan Trade Pact to increase pressure on Japan. In retaliation, Japan signed a tripartite agreement with Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy in 1940, joining the Axis powers. In response to Japan's actions, the United States imposed a scrap metal and fuel embargo on Japan. Additionally, the U.S. froze Japanese assets and closed the Panama Canal to Japanese ships. Fuel was Japan's most important resource, and 80% of the country's fuel imports came from the United States. This embargo meant that the Japanese Navy would become inoperative. Diplomatic negotiations reached a peak on November 26, 1941, when Prime Minister Hideki Toyo issued an ultimatum. Japan had to choose between complying with the demands of the United States and Britain or continuing its expansionist policy. However, if Japan withdrew, it would lose its acquired position and prestige in the international arena. Moreover, Japan was concerned about the islands in the Pacific Ocean falling under Western control. And that's a wrap for this video. See you in the next one, so stay tuned.